Welcome, everyone. I'm Josh Owen, Director in the Industrial Design Program and Program Associate at the Vignelli Center for Design Studies. Welcome to our monthly Design Conversations lecture, sponsored by the Bailey Design Group. We're pleased to have you here today and hope to see you every month, although this is the last month for a while. Our guest tonight is Sam Aquillano. We're excited to have him here. He's a bit of a legend, actually.
Oh boy. Oof.
A living legend.
Yeah, still alive.
So, but before I introduce Sam, I have a short job to do. We have had for the last number of years a fellowship in place with the Corning Museum of Glass, and it is our tradition before a Vignelli lecture to award this fellowship to one of our graduate students each year. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the fellowship. Glass Lab is an active arm of the Corning Museum of Glass, which investigates hot glass work in an experimental way, allowing architects and designers to explore their technology using their craftspeople to aid the designers in realizing special projects. RIT Industrial Design and Glass Lab met each other a number of years ago, and this fellowship provides this one graduating RIT Industrial Design student with an opportunity to explore glass as a medium for rapid prototyping and participate in a 2-day Glass Lab session at the Corning Museum of Glass after the year is over. When we select the recipient for this award each year, we look at the following important criteria: exceptional design skills, excellent communication skills across mediums, verbal, drawing, etc., a high degree of maturity, and a strong track record of meaningful contributions to the industrial design program here at RIT. So the Corning Museum, if you haven't been, is well worth a visit. It's a remarkable conglomerate of interesting architectural buildings nestled just down the road from us in Corning. In fact, the recently designed building is kind of a phenomenal glass box, which uses natural light to show off the glass. It's rather extraordinary condition to look at glass work in. I highly encourage you to go. A little bit of the history on this relationship with Corning. In 2012, a senior design studio entitled Meta Project collaborated with Corning, and Rob Cassetti, who's the creative director of the museum, who's also trained as an industrial designer, helped shepherd a number of student projects into Design Week in New York City as part of this course. After completion of that project, they invited me to do a Glass Lab session to better understand what the opportunities are with this platform. So I spent 2 days working with their technicians in developing a special project at Corning, and that output went into their collection. Inspired me to try to find a way to allow this opportunity to port into our student population. So we sent a couple of the Meta Project winners down to do a 2-day session as part of Glass Lab, and they developed some prototypes of interest to them. That led to a graduate design laboratory course called Activating the Archives, where we brought in about 13 graduate students in the ID program to do an extended Glass Lab experiment. That went extraordinarily well, and it led to the forging of this annual fellowship award. So we've had a number of recipients. This began in 2013. David Strauss, in his second year as a grad student, went down and explored a project that he was interested in realizing. In 2014, Bridget Sheehan was selected as a recipient. She also went down and spent 2 days working on a project that she developed. 2015, Tim Copeland, another graduate student, explored a project that he had actually started in a course. And in 2016, Maharani did a jewelry project, which was quite interesting. In 2017, David Villarreal did his project, and all these, by the way, are available on the website to take a look at. This year, the faculty who teach in the grad program looked at the interested applicants. It's always a hard decision to make, but the 2018 award goes to somebody who has been extraordinarily dedicated to the program and has filled all the criteria that we look at in spades. That's not her. Or him. So the award goes to Andrea. Congratulations.
Oh, made a photo, quick photo.
Photo op.
Photo or it didn't happen.
More?
All right, we're all family here. So, we offer our special thanks to our good friends at Corning for creating this opportunity for you, and we look forward to mentoring you and to helping you succeed in that very interesting opportunity. So, we'll be in touch. So, on to the legend.
Oh my God.
Sam Aquillano is the founder and executive director of Design Museum Foundation, a national multi-site design museum operating across 3 branches: Boston, Portland, and San Francisco, and growing across the country. Their mission: bring the transformative power of design everywhere to inspire a world full of creative problem solvers by producing inspiring exhibitions and events, educating everyone from kids to CEOs of design thinking, and transforming cities and communities through innovative public demonstration projects. Design is everywhere, so the museum has no permanent address. Instead, Sam and his team turn the museum inside out and transform entire cities into locally focused but nationally connected design museums built around placemaking and community. Sam earned a BFA in Industrial Design from RIT and went on to design consumer electronics at Bose Corporation, as well as teaching design at Wentworth Institute of Technology, MassArt, and Babson College, where he earned his MBA. With a passion for design, creativity, and learning, Sam creates a long-term vision for the museum and leads a dedicated team while managing key programs, directing strategic operations, and scaling the design museum model to new markets around the world. Tonight, you'll experience Sam's entrepreneurial journey from industrial designer to museum founder and learn how Design Museum Foundation is rethinking how a 21st century museum engages the public to make design accessible to all. We are very excited to have Sam with us again tonight. Welcome, Sam.
Thanks. Awesome. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks, Josh. I don't know if you know how awesome Josh is, but I go to a lot of design schools in my job, and you guys are pretty lucky to have him. I'm so psyched to be back. It's been a while. I don't think I graduated in 2004. I think I've been back to Rochester once for like a wedding, but now I'm here, back on campus. This is the real deal. Thank you for having me for this opportunity. I want to start by just saying that I loved my time here. I had an amazing experience. I want to call out, is Kim Sherman still here? I don't see his face. There he is back there. And Stan Rickel, 2 people, and also trying to throw Alan Reddig into the mix, who not only shaped me as a designer, but as a person. I mean, these, oh my, there, Alan Reddig, everyone. There he is. On cue, I love it. Well, I'm also saying this because I hope the students who are here are making the most of your time, because it's just such a great place in the middle of nowhere to learn and to focus. And I don't think I left the 4th floor for 4 years. So anyway, I thought I also want to say how awesome it is to be in the Vignelli Center. I got a little bit of a tour, and it's a really special place as well. Like, what an asset for a design school to have. I got to meet Massimo and Layla when I was here. It wasn't like an official event. They were like just walking around. I can't remember if it was like super late or really early. It was like somewhere. And they were kind of like walking around the studio, and I was in there. And I actually worked on this project in Alan's class. This is a fruit bowl I designed. And I was kind of sitting there. I was like, I knew they were important, and I was just gonna like just keep working. And they came up to me, and they were like asking about the project, and I was telling them about it. And Massimo and Layla just like sitting there the whole time, just kind of like just taking it all in. And then Massimo's only feedback was, "You need to make it round." And I was like, "What?" And I was like, I just gave like this guy like my full life story on this project. And then I was like, of course, did my research. And I was like, oh, I got it. This is actually coming from a real place. And I got to see this stuff today, so it was really cool. So thank you again for having me. I thought I would spend this evening telling you a little about my story from sort of finding industrial design to, I don't really do industrial design anymore, even though I miss it a lot. But does that sound good? Tell you a little of my story. I love Q&A too, so hopefully we have time at the end for that. So my story starts, this is definitely not me. That is an ice boat. But the only reason I bring it up is I toured, I think, 20 colleges around the tri-state area in New England looking for like where I was going to go to school. And my folks were just so supportive. I think my dad was the only of his siblings that went to college. My mom and her siblings, no one went to college. So big deal. The first son is like going off to school. What's he going to do? I had no idea what I wanted to do. I knew I like to make things, I like to draw, I like to create, I like to take things apart, I like to build fort. And I was all these things I love to do. They're all design, obviously. But of course, I was like looking at engineering schools. Do we have engineers in the audience? It's okay. It's all good. Thank you for what you do. Because, oh my God, I could not do it. And we need you. So keep at it. Anyway, so I toured all these schools looking at different engineering programs and just being like, oh my God, not happy about my future. And I was sitting in the financial aid office here at RIT, and I was just like, my parents, of course, were like talking with the people there, figuring out how the hell they were going to pay for this thing. And I turned to my right, I'll never forget it, and there was like, all the pamphlets for all the different majors. I don't know if you guys still have those, but there was one for industrial design. And on the cover was, I think Craig McCart had a sketch of an ice boat on this brochure, and I was like, I think my mom's, there it is, or at least something, yeah. My mom still has it, so she sent me a couple pictures. But I was like, what is this industrial design thing? Like, this is it. This is everything that I want to do. I want to make products, I want to make things, I want to draw, I want to sketch, I want to build stuff. And it was this moment where I was like, it was like eureka moment. And I was the kid who, this is also, my mom still has this. This is my book of ideas that I started when I was 13 years old. It also has tabs, so you can very quickly get to the good ideas. So I started this, and so me in design, it was so obvious to me that it was what I needed to do with the rest of my life. By the way, I hadn't seen design anywhere else, so I thought RIT was the only place that had it, which is so wrong. But I told my parents, I'm only applying to RIT. And they were like, you're nuts. And I was like, this is what I want to do. And they were like, tell us about this design thing. And they're like, well, you're not going to become an artist. You're crazy. And they were like totally against me being a designer. So it was like this weird, like the most supportive people in my life still are. And then for me to like find my dream, for them to be like, there's no jobs, you're not going to be able to live, you need to be a lawyer, you're a doctor. And I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. No, you guys are on the right track. This is the best major in the world. Anyway, that was the kernel, I think, of the idea of why I started the design museum, because here are these two really thoughtful, educated people, like my parents, who had no idea what design was. And design impacts everything. I mean, you guys know this, but not everyone knows this. That's why I have a job. So at the Design Museum, we create exhibitions, events, education. I mean, Josh threw out all the stuff that we do, stuff from kids all the way to adults, CEOs, all about making design visible and educating people about the impact of design, maybe even, not necessarily turning them into designers, but having them be able to use creative problem solving in anything that they do. We really come from the philosophy that design can change the world. I mean, that's what I learned here, and we don't apologize for it. It's real. We see design as a process that can create the future, and it's really a way to make change, and that's a big responsibility. We do think anyone can use design thinking. We were talking about design. For us, it's just thinking. I don't know what people, it's crazy, but it's a buzzword. So we think about design in these three buckets of like anyone can be a design thinker, but if you're gonna make a product or if you're gonna build a house, you probably wanna hire a doer who's actually trained and who's an expert. So we do celebrate the design experts in our world. And then we love design strategy, so making big complex decisions using design, whether it be in a business or an organization. Part of what I wanted to do with the museum was show the behind the scenes of design. Josh saw me getting like giddy when I was looking at the, what did you call the project when we were looking at all the boxes? The time capsule, yeah? I love design process, because I think everyone knows like, this is a microphone. But they don't know all the intelligence and creativity that went into actually making this microphone, right? I just listened to a podcast about going from the rotary, this is for you, Alan, this is calling out for you. This is when they went from the rotary phone, the thing, to push buttons. And like we take for granted like the design of the keypad, but they had to think that through and decide like, why is it going to be in this pattern and not, why don't they be a circle of, I'm sure there's a phone out there that's a circle of buttons. Kim's like, yeah, definitely, yeah, it exists, I had it. So I love design process and the thinking that goes behind it, and I wanted to show that to people because it's not enough to see the finished product. I wanted to show both the process and the impact that it has, right, on either side. So, and also I'm super interested, this is that design strategy piece, in using design to tackle sort of these large scale questions, these big problems like education, clean water. Design can be at the table for all these really interesting things, and I think should be. And we're starting to see designers get involved in government, which I love. So lots of interesting things that we tackle at the museum. We do it sort of in these three buckets. We do inspirational exhibitions and events. We have a whole education program. I love teaching kids design. You don't even need to teach them, you just need to like provide the space. We're doing a lot more, since we've done a lot in sort of young kids, we've realized that it's really teenagers that need us more than anything. And so we're doing a lot with teens, which is a lot of fun. And then something that we do that I think is unique to museums, that we actually do design, we put it into the world. And so those are the demonstration projects. I'll talk more about it, but we've installed new playgrounds in 4 cities around the US to show how inserting design into a city can really change the urban fabric. So we're in 3 cities. It's a really interesting business model and concept. We're gonna go into it, but we're gonna back up. We're gonna go rewind, 2004. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit, because I was an industrial designer, and I had the dream job. I had loved my job. I had such an awesome opportunity. Before this, actually, worked for the amazing Bruce Leonard as an intern at Kodak. So I should have had a slide for that. But after school, I got a job at Bose Corporation. You all know Bose, the wave radio? Great, we're starting at a good place. And I also want to thank Josh for giving me the opportunity to blow the dust off the portfolio. Here it is. So I got this great job. I was 21, working at Bose, and I was the youngest designer, I think, by probably 30 years. So it was like a team of, they'd been there a long time, and I was sort of like their first hire in a very long time. So a very interesting time to be a young person and have like multiple mentors. But I got to design this really cool portable speaker. Remember the iPod? That was a thing. And you could like dock it. There's no Bluetooth, people. You actually had to dock it in this speaker. By the way, this was probably 2006. And like my family started to like realize what I did, right? Because I would like bring these home and be like, well, first of all, I was like Santa, right? I was like giving them out like they were going out of style. And everyone's like, wow. And so they're starting to realize that, small story, when my brother gave his speech at my wedding, he mentioned this product. And everyone clapped. And I was like, this is nuts. But But like people were, in my family at least, were starting to like realize like what design was and what Sam did for a living, and it was a cool moment. I became sort of the remote control designer at Bose, which was like such a weird. I would like, when I was like dating, I would tell girls that like they'd be like, "What do you do?" And I'd be like, "I design remotes," and they were like, "What the?" And like that didn't work very well, but I loved it because I really loved organizing things for people to use. I loved like organizing buttons, and this was the thing that people actually use, right? You put the speaker away, like you never touch that again. You use the remote every day, and so I designed the remotes for Bose for like 10 years. And they're still in the product line, which is so fun and so cool. This was fun. I got to design like a user interface. So that I worked at Bose when Dr. Bose was still alive and still working there, and he wanted us to design a TV where you didn't have to look down at the remote, right? So when you touch that little like touch sensor, this little like frame, digital frame, like came in, and then you kind of spun your, I call it the square iPod, but it was successful. It was really cool. One day, my boss at Bose, and I shit you not, I was wearing a Star Wars t-shirt, as I did back then, and he came up to me and he was like, "You like Star Wars?" And I was like, "Dude, I'm wearing this shirt." He was like, "Oh, I didn't know." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." He's like, would you like to design the Millennium Falcon? And I was like, "Dude, what are you saying?" And he was like, "So Bose is partnered with the Museum of Science in Boston, and they're going to do a flight simulator of the Millennium Falcon, and they need someone to design like the inside, and it's going to be kind of like an exhibit, and it's going to be we built speakers into the seats. You can see the subwoofer there. It's pretty dark, but anyway, got to design that. I got to meet George Lucas. I mean, I'm showing you this because it was the coolest job, and I was like super lucky to have it. And I just want you guys to know like why I went from like having the coolest job and almost a pension. I was 6 months from being locked into a pension for the rest of my life. I threw it all away to start Design Museum. Anyway, so I got to do a lot of really cool stuff at Bose, but also Bose is very siloed. A lot's changed since then. But when I was there, industrial designers, you were like handed your brief, you didn't question it, you just designed it, and you did it, that's it. And I wasn't down with that because there started to be this kind of, I had learned to do user research here at RIT, and there was a couple people who were like clandestine at Bose doing user research, and I like somehow got onto that team. When my boss saw like the final report and it said Sam Aquillano on it, he was like, "What have you been doing?" But I visited, I think in my course of my career at Bose, probably 300 homes, talking to people about, so back up, we had this theory that people weren't using their iPods, right? My grandma got an iPod, and it just sat on her credenza. She never touched it. Why? She didn't know how to put music on it. She didn't have a computer. One of my cousins probably got her the iPod because that's what you do. So we went out and visited all these people, and we started to create, it was the iPod paperweight, right? iPods were flooding the market, but people who were like, even in their 40s, 50s, they didn't know how to use it, they didn't want to use it. They listened to radio, right? The music just push the button and the music plays. And so we interviewed all these people who started to come up with our own product brief. This was unheard of at Bose. And I don't want to say that like I invented Pandora or Spotify or the iPhone, because I didn't. But we had a really cool idea, which was to basically, for people who wanted to listen to music, we would just stream them music. And as they listened and as they kind of thumbs up and thumbs down, we'd give them music that they liked. And it was a really cool project. Bose does music, right? So I basically wrote the product brief. And my boss loved that. He was like, "Whoa, designers we're getting into the mix." You can imagine though that the rest of the business was like, no. And this was like my first experience of what's like not invented here. Like marketing creates the products. Designers just design the products. And I was like, well, that is terrible, right? Because they weren't doing user research. They were, coming up with stuff that they liked, which is never good. So we got really far in this project. I was down in our factory in Mexico, like looking at parts, and then it was canceled. And I was like, my baby is gone. Sad moment. So then I was like, okay, maybe, and the feedback from Dr. Bose was that this was too ambitious, Sam. This is way too ambitious. And I was like, okay, all right. I'm going to crack off a smaller piece for the next go round. You guys know the Wave radio? This is the Wave music system. It was so loud and so good that they call it the music system. What is missing from this product? Anyone? Thank you. The buttons. The buttons are gone. Because it sounded so good that you just put it up on your shelf and you wouldn't touch it. It sounds so amazing. And quick story, I didn't design this, but I was in the room. This came from, so we had our like wren-shaped model of the Wave radio, and my colleague Seth had all these different button arrangements on paper that he was like putting on the top of the Wave radio, and then, this is for Dr. Bose, and he'd be like, do you like this one? They'd take it off, like this one, and Dr. Bose was like, leave it off. And we were like, you're insane. So no buttons. So again, I'm going into people's houses, and I'm talking to them, and I'm noticing something. They used to have their Wave radio on their nightstand, like right near their bed, right? Because they're like their alarm clock, so they listen to music. Now this thing's way too loud. I mean, it would blow you out of the bed. So they're like, okay, we put it on the shelf over there. But then I started seeing all these little, like you guys have seen these, like little radios on the nightstand, and they're not Bose. And I'm like, well, this is ridiculous. Like we've kind of created a problem here. And I was like, well, okay, I was very ambitious with the music system, or the portable device. If Bose can't make a radio, we can't make anything. So again, wrote the product brief, tried to work with marketing as best I could. You guys already know the punchline, canceled. Bose can't make a radio. And I was like, okay. And at this point, my boss like knew, like he's like, Sam is not happy. We're gonna lose him. But it really wasn't even that. Like I loved what I was doing, but the real kicker was my last project at Bose. So it was these computer speakers. They're still on the market. I'm really proud of the design. I love them. I should say my first year at Bose, the head of engineering called me the corporate hairdresser. So that was like my welcome to the corporate world. But he loved this product. He was like, Sam, this is a beautiful design. I'm like, okay, the head of engineering likes it. And I'm not saying this like for an ego thing, but it was easy, right? I knew everyone to talk to at Bose to make exactly what I wanted to happen. I knew who to like work with, who to manipulate, who to like get a favor like on the plastic tooling side to like add another slide to the tool. I just knew it was just the easiest project, and when people are patting me on the back, they're like, you did it, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm terrified. Because I saw my colleagues, who are in their senior, later on in their career, and I'm like, if I'm not going to be challenged again in this job, I got a big problem. And as you guys saw, I tried to kind of push the envelope here and there, and I was just feeling like, do I really want to wait around for strike 3? And so the answer is basically no. At the same time I was working at Bose, I had a lot of other stuff going on. So I was teaching, which I loved. I got the random opportunity to teach. They needed someone to teach consumer electronics, and I was like, that's what I do. I ran the IDSA chapter. You all know IDSA. I ran that in Boston. A lot of fun. So I get this entrepreneurial activity, like creating events and conferences and mentorship programs, raising money, which I never thought I would have to do, but that was really interesting. And then I was also going back to get my MBA at Babson. So a lot was happening, and I also had this crazy idea kind of in the back of my head all the time. I would stay up late. So I have insomnia, can't sleep, worked really well for industrial design because who needs to sleep when you're making your models? So I would stay up late. I actually recently found melatonin. It's a great natural sleep aid. If I had found melatonin back in whatever, 2006, the museum wouldn't exist. I mean, I was like purely so true. I stand by it. So just wait till after graduation. But I would stay up super late Googling Boston Design Museum. I'd visit all these cool design museums through my travels at work. And as I told you, I had this kind of like notion of educating people about the impact of design. But I was still like, is this something that's even doable, possible? And I will never forget there was like a discussion board. I don't know if you guys remember those, but people were talking about a Boston Design Museum. And they were like, that would be so cool, it'd be amazing. And always like, there'd be these peaks, and I never contributed to the discussion board, but there's always be a little someone being like, someone should really do this. Wouldn't that just be so great if someone did this? And I was like, maybe I could be the one to do this. Like, I love design, I love people, community, education, like everything that I showed on those, these bubbles, right? The things that I was doing. And I thought maybe the museum would be an interesting way to bring that all together and to really create something. It didn't hurt that I was reading one of my favorite books called The Art of the Start. If you haven't read it, it's awesome. I think it's in this like Art of the Start 2.0 version now. Very inspiring of like, here's how you get shit done and get it out. I also had a co-founder. That's my best friend, Derek. So we were also kind of like sharing these ideas. And if you want to start something, get a co-founder because you need that person to tell you you're not crazy over and over and over again. And Derek and I certainly did that for each other when we were like, two 20-somethings in Boston being like, we're gonna start a museum. Of course that's what we're gonna do. So in 2008, we were both teaching at Mass Art, and some of you know Jamie Reed, who's the chair of the program at Mass Art, was our boss, and he kind of got wind that Derek and I were talking about developing like an exhibit about design that we would bring to the public. And so, I always like to show this is the fateful napkin sketch. One night on the back of a pizza box, we were like sketching what this exhibit could be. And at that point, we really were just thinking about it as an exhibit. I mean, in my back of my mind, I'm like every night Googling Boston Design Museum. But I'm like, yeah, it's just an exhibit. But this really formed the framework of like the design process, the actual product. Of course, we're industrial designers, so we're thinking product. And then what's the impact and the benefit? So this was a really kind of like moment for us. Of course, Derek and I, as two ambitious people, were like, well, an exhibit's not enough. It needs to be a whole museum. And so in 2009, we created this vision book. I always love to show this because we had a picture of a brick wall because we were like, we're gonna get a building and we're gonna be a real museum. And there's so many typos in this document as I was reading through it for this presentation, but that's all good. But the whole idea for this was to show people, we showed this to our closest mentors. We showed it to Jamie at Mass Art. We showed it to a couple other colleagues, and people were like, you're crazy, but you're not that crazy. Like, this is something that Boston needs, and that could make a really big impact. We also, you guys can't read it, but that says that in 2011, we're gonna have our brick and mortar launch. That's when we were gonna open our building, it was 2011, big ideas. We also had all these pictures of amazing museums from around the world, design museums. We got the Wolfsonian, Cooper Hewitt. This was what we were gonna make. This is it, right? This is what's in my head, in our heads. And people thought we were nuts. Like, my parents are calling me like, you're crazy, you're so close to the pension, what are you doing? And they're like, how do you even know how to start a nonprofit? Like, how do you even do something like this? And I was like, well, I'll just read about it. So I read this book from cover to cover about how to form a nonprofit corporation, as you do. And I will say, I always like to show this slide because, so I don't teach anymore. I used to teach young people and interact with a lot, and I still hear so many young people being like, well, I don't know how to do this. And I'm like, there is no excuse to say that, unless it's like complex like brain surgery or something. But like, you can read about it, you can Google it. Like, my mom would always be like, how do you know how to file your taxes? And I'm like, well, I just Googled, file small nonprofit taxes. And did I screw up a couple times? Yes. I've gotten so many letters from the IRS. It's amazing. And they're like, you checked yes here, but no here. And of course, I'm like, that's bad design of this form. They don't care about that. And I'll just be like, well, no, I meant to check yes, and then it's fine. It's not like a scary place. It's like a bunch of people like in a room sending out letters. But anyway, I just like to say that because I literally had no idea what I was doing, but the key was just Googling and finding books and talking to people and asking stupid questions over and over and over until we had some sort of picture of how we could move forward. I mean, we were so naive. I mean, the definition of naive. There was also, this was what, 2008, 2009, there was an effort to create a Boston museum, just a museum about Boston. I mean, there's so much history and innovation and sports. And they had every multi-million-dollar donor. They had, I don't know if you guys know Boston, but there's the Greenway, which used to be like the highway, and they made a park there. They had the rights to make the only building on this huge kind of serpentine park. They had everything going for them. They folded during the financial crisis. And Derek and I are like, holy, how are we gonna create a museum? We have nothing. We both donated $500 each to form our nonprofit corporation on LegalZoom.com. I'm contractually obligated to say that? No. Yeah, we had nothing. So first thing we did, I think that was interesting and kind of filters into the way we actually pivoted the museum, was we started an online community. So this might sound crazy, but back then, like, Facebook wasn't as big as it is now. There was services out there where you can create your own social network. And actually those are coming back now that Facebook is like super evil. So we created our own kind of social network, and we called it Designing a Museum. And here's a screenshot from when there was just 3 members, me, Derek, my brother. But we grew it to almost 1,000 members on this website. And we kept putting things out there saying, like, what would a museum look like in Boston? Like, what could it be? Would you want to get involved? Do you want to donate? There's a big donate button up there. So all of a sudden, like, money started coming in. I was like, that's interesting. And just getting feedback from people was incredible. Like, this, we called it, I think it's actually in the text that I wrote, but yeah, designing a museum is the ultimate design project, right? So we're like, if this is a design project, we need input. We need people, right? And people are the core of what we do even now. So we started a whole series of events. These are photos from one of our first events. There I am. I think I'm wearing a tie. That's good. There's people even in these photos who have become board members and who have become donors. So there's people who've been with us from the beginning. But I mentioned 2009, and I mentioned how it was literally the worst time to start a new nonprofit. The worst. I mean, I got a lot of like pats on the head, like, great, Sam, great idea. Please leave. People even, so there was also, talk about like deck stacked against us, there was a competing design museum concept happening in Boston. So it was a bunch of architects, and they were going to create a space and get money and do it. They had millions of dollars. They also didn't do it because the recession just crushed it. So we obviously had to think differently about it. We could have quit, we could have given up, but we really believed in our approach and what we could do. So Josh mentioned it, but our tagline, even, I should say, when we started, was design is everywhere, right? That notion that design is part of everything, it interacts with everything, it's ubiquitous. And we just kind of added the so are we as like, well, we don't actually need our own building. It's just like crazy, especially back then, especially in Boston, which is like a museum town. I mean, there's so many marble columns in Boston, it's nuts. And so instead of a building, we pop up in different places all over the city. Could be a school, could be a public building, you name it. We've been all over the airport. We've done stuff everywhere. And it's just this interesting mode of collaboration and partnership that comes out of, as soon as you don't have a building and you don't kind of like a stake in the ground, then you're kind of agnostic and people are like, oh yeah, come take over our museum for 2 weeks, or come pop up in our lobby for 6 months. And it's this really interesting partnership building mechanism that I love. And it's been a really interesting, fun thing. So I want to show you guys some of the projects we've done over the years. I think that would be good. Cool. We got our big break in 2010. So we had made sort of like the pivot, right? We had seen all around Boston a lot of unused and empty retail spaces, right? Businesses, they were going out of business, and downtown was kind of looking like a ghost town. And we said, well, we could kind of take over one of these unused spaces and get our kind of pop-up museum going. And so we met with some of the landlords and owners, and they were, it's really cool. Like, they wanted to activate their space too, right? They wanted to show that there was some life. And they're like, cool, so what's your, you have insurance, you have this and that. And we're like, no, we got nothing. And so like space after space, like even our idea of popping up in other people's spaces, like we just almost weren't ready for it. And I'll never forget, I went like straight to City Hall because there was like a business development group there who was trying to like get businesses into these spaces. And they were like, screw that, like don't do your exhibit out there, do it at City Hall. Help us kind of make City Hall a really cool place to be. And we were like, oh my God, like I couldn't have planned it better, right? I don't know about Rochester. Boston City Hall is a very active place. Like people are getting married there, people are paying their parking tickets. It's kind of this is a really dark picture, but in front of City Hall is like this big plaza, City Hall Plaza. There's events, and we're like, this is a gift. If we can do our first exhibit at City Hall. So many people still to this day tell me that they saw us exhibit and they were like, this is super cool. and they remember it. And so we, it's like an ugly brutalist building, so we kind of tried to like transform it into the design museum. The first exhibit we did, we called it Creative Capital. The whole idea was to show design that was happening in Boston, right? To show people different projects. So we had an ID project, had to show that. Of course, it's barware. Designers love to drink. This is a by 11. We had landscape architecture, super meta. We had an exhibit design case study within the exhibit. Love that. And we would do tours, like relentlessly doing tours for like high school students, businesses. And I think that one of the most strategic things, again, not strategic, but we did most of the exhibit up on the 9th floor of Boston, which is like the urban planning department. And so every architect, every real estate developer had to go to the 9th floor. All the time. And so they're all seeing this. And now, kind of crazy, but we have a lot of donors who are architects and tons of donors who are in real estate. They have money and they have spaces that they want to activate, and they remember that we activated City Hall, and it has paid off over and over and over again. So that was an amazing first project, and really solidified this model that we kept saying, like, if we can pop up at City Hall, which is like the coldest, we couldn't nail into the concrete, so we had to like come up with how we're going to hang all this stuff. Like the fact that we pulled this off, and I still was full time at Bose at this time, which is crazy. Anyway, another really cool project. We got a grant super early in our history from the NEA, which changed everything for us. In fact, I once met she is the outgoing administrator of the NEA, and I was like, thank you so much for providing that startup capital. And she was like, the NEA does not provide startup capital. We fund projects on their merits. And I was like, cool. Yeah, it was a great project. Anyway, the whole idea was to, again, I don't know how much you guys know Boston, but so this is Southie, that kind of like wedge mass on the right, and it is sort of like the new Boston, right? There is so much going on in terms of real estate development. It is literally on fire. There are so many new buildings, I can't even keep track. And I used to live down there, but it was like garbage town, and you could get like mugged, and you'd see like the cars on like the blocks. And now, obviously can't afford to live there. I can't even afford to like grocery shop there. Anyway, so there's this weird moment when, so my wife's an artist, and we live down there in this artist community, and there's this real worry that like the artists were gonna get like totally displaced. And so we came up with I thought a really cool project to do. So there's this waterway, it's a post-industrial waterway, it's called the Fort Point Channel, and really wasn't activated. We always used to like to say, there's Boston Common up there in the top left corner, that the actual surface area of Boston Common and the surface area of that waterway are exactly the same. So it's like, oh, could we do something with the channel to activate it? And so we came with this cool idea to do public benches. Like I always loved public seating as a way to engage people and for them to connect. And so we ended up doing an international design competition to design new public benches for around the channel. One of the coolest things we did, I still love to this day, is you had to submit a model, which was just like, these are the best. They're like, I still have some on my desk. They're like little dollhouse furniture, so cute. And it was, I think the key thing for the judges was, if you could make a really good model, you could probably make a really good bench. Like if you could build it, right? A lot of people were like, crap models, and we're like, they can't win. Because we selected the winners and they had to build, we gave them money, and then you go off and they build their real bench. And so these benches were out for, I think, almost a year around the channel, totally transformed this area, right? This is an area where people would not hang out, not engage, and all of a sudden you see people eating their lunch outside, you see people meeting. It just really changed the whole, and I would say even, I'll take some credit that it opened up the city's eyes to what is possible with public art. I think before, this is called street seats, public art was sort of seen as like, oh, these crazy artists want to do like a sculpture somewhere, which is great, and I love sculptures, but I think this project helped open up certainly the mayor's eyes at the time to kind of be like, oh, like it can be designed in public, and it can really beautify the city and make people think. And we did these, we call them beacons, so they're signs. You know, obviously we don't have museum walls, but this is a good slide because you can see we put the design process for each bench. So you're sitting there at the bench, and this was literally an exhibit that you could put your butt on. And people asked us, they were like, can we sit on these? Is it okay if we sit on these? And we're like, yes, that's the whole idea. So you sit on them. We had the beacons. You could learn all about the design process, the design team. We had a really cool app. I personally crawled on top. In the middle of the channel is the Boston. This is where the Boston Tea Party happened. There's a Boston Tea Party museum, and we didn't have all the fancy technology we have now with like beacons and whatnot. So I had to mount a Wi-Fi antenna at the very top of the Tea Party museum. I still don't know why they said yes to that. But anyway, so with that Wi-Fi network, we could tell where you were when you had the app open. And so when you were at the Stratiform bench, we could pull up more information about that bench. And so you could see videos and really cool. Another fun touch, my co-founder, while I was working at Bose, he was working at Philips Lighting. And so Philips donated all these cool LEDs, and they made part of the app. So you could actually change the color of our beacons, and you could do it remotely. So this is like my favorite thing to do for that whole year, was like sit on one side of the channel, and like someone would be approaching a bench, and I would just start changing the colors, and it'd be like disco, and they'd be like, and then they would stop and be like, oh my God, what is this bench? And it was this like really cool way of like fishing for people who didn't know about design. And my favorite story around this was we did a whole kids program. So we brought kids on a tour of the benches. They loved them. There's no playground down there at the time. And so we did a kids project. They would design their own benches. But on the tour, there'd always be like one kid who was like super sarcastic and like stop at like a normal bench, like a wrought iron bench, like a Boston bench. And the one kid, he'd be like, oh, is this bench designed? That was my impression. And I'd be like, stop the tour. Yes, this bench was designed. It's not just these crazy looking benches, but everything is designed. And so the kids would start looking at buildings and being like, wait, so are buildings designed? And I'd be like, yes, yes, we're doing it. It's real. And so this is a really great project, kind of indicative of everything that we do. We did events around it, like I said, tours. We've redone this project in Portland, Oregon, so it's on view right now. So if you ever got to Portland, so we did a whole new competition, a whole new site, really cool. It recently survived an alt-right rally, so it's very durable. And my insurance company loves me because we're responsible for all these. But anyway, so that's a great project. We did a whole project. This is our first nationally traveling exhibition. So we said, look, we're doing these amazing exhibitions. Why don't we just pop up in Boston? That's not enough. And so our big idea was, let's do a two-dimensional exhibit. We're not going to travel these benches around. So these are called Green Patriot posters. They're also designed by people all around the world. This was started by a couple. They were landscape photographers, and their whole project was to, this is my favorite one on the right, their project was to document how landscapes change with climate change. Climate change is a long process, and so they were showing their photos, and they weren't changing anyone's minds about climate change. And so they thought, oh, when was a time when graphic design had to rally people, had to change people's minds? And it was World War II, right? Propaganda posters, fight the Nazis, in this case, fight climate change. And so they worked with designers, like I said, all around the world, famous designers. I think left is Shepard Fairey, that's his style. Doing some really cool projects that I loved. And so we brought this to, I think, 7 cities around the US. A lot of fun. We had so much fun that we decided to go national with the museum. So we said, we're pop-up, we're nomadic, we don't have our own building. Instead of going deep into one city, what if we went wide and brought design to other places? And so we started in Portland, Oregon. We can go into why Portland later. But our first project that we did in multiple cities was this whole 3D printed jewelry design competition. And then we exhibited the collection in multiple cities. So some really cool stuff. The idea around this was not only to create some beautiful objects, but at the time, not a lot of people even knew what 3D printing was. And so this was a cool way. I'm always looking for ways to make design accessible. And so we did a fashion show in both cities. It was a blast, a lot of fun. More recent projects, we have a whole exhibition that's traveling now. It's been now also to 7 cities called Extraordinary Playscapes. This exhibit's all about design and the importance of outdoor play, not only for children, but also for adults. And so I think especially now we're looking at the impact of design really closely, and every project that we do has to have that impact piece. And there's certainly a lot of impact around the importance of play. I love this picture because this is like the preeminent play designer on the left in Portland, and he's actually on the timeline later. He hasn't gotten to it yet, but he's on the timeline, so it's pretty cool. The exhibit, we try to bring these exhibits to life, so you can actually play in the exhibit, right? You can make your own playground. We have full-size, again, my insurance company loves me, full-size play equipment so kids can have fun in the exhibit, can play while the parents are reading more of the content. We like to take our let our projects go where they want, and we just kind of follow. And so that's kind of a metaphor, I guess. So we thought it's not enough to have a gallery exhibit about play. There's amazing play happening around the city. So there's those beacons again. We took the beacons and we put them at playgrounds around Greater Boston. And you can go and you could read about that playground. And we put together a little publication. It's called the Playground Passport. Who doesn't love alliteration? And then you had your map. And we had people like on Instagram, and they'd Instagram them and their families every weekend at a different playground. It was like dream. Loved it. And then the kind of crescendo moment was, well, it's not enough to show people the gallery exhibit, show them the playgrounds that already exist, but let's show them the impact of a playground. And I worked with this, he's an 80-year-old designer. He designed these, I don't know if you teach him in History of ID, Richard Datner, he designed these play cubes, but they were like fiberglass, and his whole thing was creating adventure playgrounds, but to make them cheaper. Like, aside from the slide, you don't really know how to play on this thing. And so I've seen kids, they make like a lemonade stand in there. It's all, pretend. Of course, the floor is lava at all times. But we've installed these in 4 cities. This one's in Chicago on the Riverwalk, to show that design can completely transform a space. And every time it completely has. So that's that demonstration piece that I talked about. We do a lot of publishing. We have a quarterly magazine that I love. Josh and I were talking about the lack of great design case studies that talk about just the importance of design. That's what the magazine's all about. We published our first book at the end of last year called Design and Play. I'm going to send a copy over for the department. A lot of fun, all the different playscapes from around the world, some great articles about play. Our next exhibition, our latest, I guess, is all about prosthetic design. I thought you guys might like this. It's product design like heaven. Huge need. So there's a lot of people out there living with limb loss, limb difference. And the industry hasn't changed much since like the 16th century. So you still see a lot of the same kind of forms and function until now, right? Now you've got robotics, and you've got technology, and you've got 3D printing, and it's just this kind of exhibit's never been done before. We popped it up in Portland earlier this year, and we're going to be doing it in Boston next year. This is a robotic arm, and Mike spoke at one of our events. So cool. This beautiful objects, and also interestingly functional. This isn't a functional hand, but it has LEDs in it that are synced to her heartbeat. How cool is that? So it's also like a fashion accessory. Certainly a lot of like sports case studies in our exhibit. But I want to show you this are some photos from the exhibit in Portland, because not only do we have all this great content and artifacts, but we like to bring our exhibits to life. Like, this is Braden, and he has limb loss. And he's a designer, and he has done so many tours for us out there. It is amazing when you see people being like, it just makes it very real for people, and they see the impact of design when like Braden's there talking about the accident that he had and how he didn't want to give up riding his motorcycle. And he's not a designer, but he was like, he knew how to ask the stupid questions, and he met with designers at Autodesk, and they started designing different prosthetic hands for him. We have different demo units for able-bodied people, so you can actually feel what it's like to have a prosthetic. And we have our little try tying your shoes with a traditional body-powered hook. I dare you. I can't do it. We have legs too that are really interesting to try and use. So it's a really cool exhibit. I'm really proud of the team and how they tackled it from there's a lot of sensitive stories within it, but it's truly a combination of design and human beings, literally, and medicine and healthcare. So that's coming. You should come to Boston next year and see it. It's going to be in March at the Peru. That was it for me. We do lots of things across, these are our impact areas. So all of our projects hit on at least one of these. I call these like the wings of our virtual museum. And so obviously you've seen some stuff in play, in cities, and education. It's been a really interesting 9 years. doing exhibitions, events, learning a lot, just keeping us on our toes, not having our own building, always trying new things. I definitely want to hear your questions, but I want to start with the 5 questions that I get all the time, because that would just be, why not? So, where's the museum? It's everywhere. It's everywhere. We pop up literally everywhere, and we strive to put the perception out there that Design Museum is everywhere, right? We can't obviously be everywhere, but we'll pop up a little thing over here or over there, so people are always seeing our logo around Boston and Portland and San Francisco. I love this question too. Is this your full-time job? As a matter of fact, it is. Yes. So we have 10 full-time staff. I think I hired myself in 2013, aced the interview process. It was great. It was very stringent. But yeah, so I left Bose after that City Hall exhibit and worked for free for the museum until then, 2013. Did some freelancing stuff. How do you make money? Oh, this is a good one. So now I'm a full-time fundraiser. That's my job. I don't do industrial design anymore. So sad. But I find money. So this is a little snapshot. By the way, my spreadsheets are gorgeous. That is where I put my creative talents. Also, beautiful charts. You got to have them. So my board's always like, hey, maybe if you spend a little less time like making these things beautiful, like you'd have more. I'm like, no. I can't. I have to. So anyway, we have corporate sponsors. We get grants. Of course, we do like galas and fundraising events. We have donors. Love our donors. We have a membership program. You all can become members. I mean, who wouldn't want to get the magazine in the mail every quarter? It's great. I think it's only $30 a year for students. And then we have a board and council that gives. So that's my life right there, every day, making money. I get this question a lot, what's in your collection, especially from people who run museums and think that we're a fake museum. And I always just say, everything. Everything's in my collection. Everything you see, you touch, I own it all. And then I always get this question, which I think is really interesting. What's the end goal? And it's such an interesting question to ask, I think, of a museum, but I get it a lot. And it's like, what would you, like, what's the end goal of the Vignelli Center, right? It's to exist and to change people's minds and make people happy and educate. And that's the same thing for the Design Museum, right? We have that extra barrier of showing people that we're going to be around for a long time, even though we don't have a beautiful facility, but we're around to change people's minds, make change, make impact. Thank you. I want your questions. Love it. I'm going to go all the way to the back. Where next? Oh, love that. That's great. Yeah. So we've been doing some test programs in Chicago. That'd be like my next. I feel like we need something. We're in Boston. Although Chicago's not really the middle, but kind of the virtual middle. Yeah.
How do you use your MBA education?
Oh my God, so much.
What's the question?
How do you use your MBA education? Yeah, if I didn't have my MBA, the museum would have crashed and burned a long time ago. No question. So the cool thing about starting the museum and doing the MBA at the same time was that I was like using what I was learning on a daily basis. So up until recently, I did all of our accounting. Oh my God. But even just like the business planning and, so I'll give you a very detailed example. Portland, right? Expanding outside of Boston. Huge deal for a small, we were only around for 3-4 years before we decided to expand. That's a huge, I had 2 board members resign over the vote. Yeah, it was a big deal. And they were donors, it hurt. But, so that's an aside. Use the MBA to craft a business plan and do some business modeling. I'm like, is it the right market? Basically to justify the expansion. And that's just one example. I always say like RIT in my industrial design education taught me to think with a pencil, metaphorically. Like, you want to create something, my team will tell you I use Sharpies now, and I'm just like, anything we do, I have to draw it. But the MBA education taught me to think with a spreadsheet, and that's also super powerful because you can do some really interesting modeling. And so now I have this always a moment when I'm presented with a problem. Do I go to the sketch pad first or do I go to the spreadsheet first? I usually do both, but it's always like, where am I starting? And I think that, was that worth the money? Yes, yeah, definitely. And I would highly recommend. So I went to Babson and they started like I'll call it MBA Lite program after I graduated. I'd probably do that now. I really put myself through the ringer because I had some pretty rough finance classes where I was just like, I'm not built this way. And I would tell my professors, I'd be like, I have no idea what you're saying. And I don't want to put the time in to understand it. So we're both going to exist together. But yeah, I learned a ton, and I use my business degree every day. I mean, it's what I do. It's yeah, for sure. More questions? Yeah.
Yes, in your design, your exhibit concept, what is more important, the object, the photography, or the installation?
Ooh, can I back up even one step? And I think it's the content development beforehand. So we don't have any curators on our team on purpose, because I always, sorry if there's any curators in this beautiful, beautiful building, but I always think curators are like, they got the ego and they're just like, it is the way I want it to be. And so instead, for every exhibit, so I showed you like the Playscapes exhibition, the prosthetics exhibit, we have a committee of people that we pull from the outside. So people, right? That's like I want to keep harping on, like, I curate people. So we bring the right group of people together who are experts across, like the prosthetics exhibit has prosthetic designers, doctors, people living with limb loss, amputees, you name it, every facet of prosthetics. So you bring them together, and then the magic starts to happen in the content. And I'm not even as interested in the artifacts, and only for them, how they help tell the story, right? The stories are the real piece that we're always trying to get. That is and however we can best tell the story. Could be a video that we have to produce, and we're gonna invest in that, or could be the artifact. Certainly photography and writing. Like, we have an amazing writer on our team who takes these crazy, complex stories. I mean, we have a lot of the Boston Marathon bombing survivors. Like, to sit there and interview them is really difficult, and then to absorb that and put it back out in a way that doesn't make you just want to ball up and cry, but makes you want to learn about how prosthetics have changed their lives. Like, to me, it's the storytelling that undercuts everything. Yeah.
Back to your job interview.
Oh yeah. Which one?
If you were to hire somebody to take your place, what are the qualifications?
Mm.
Why did you think you were going to be able to pull this off? Because this is just crazy.
It's nuts. Yeah, it really is. Yeah, it's a classic, like, if you knew now, what's the saying? If you knew then what you know now? I don't know. I think we had a lot of energy. We were like, you guys remember, I was busting. I was on fire. And Bose kind of stunted that a little bit, and I always hated that, right? I was like, my first couple years at Bose, I was literally on fire. I was like the Human Torch in meetings. I'd be like, we're gonna do this way, and we're gonna do that, and they just couldn't handle it. So I had to like reshape myself, right, for that final project. I wanted that back, and qualifications, I think being resourceful and not being afraid to ask people for help, huge. Josh and I talked a little about this. Again, I'm not like the nicest guy ever, but being kind and being nice. We have 12 core values at the museum. The first one is to be the nicest people in the room, no matter what. And that has served us so well in everything. And you all are probably really nice people, and so you're like thinking outside of Henrietta, like, isn't everyone nice? There are so many assholes out there, and they have power and they have money, and they make a lot of decisions, and it's terrible. But so in our model, right, Derek and I, really kind, I think thoughtful people, without a building, like, that's all we have, right? And so we used to say, like, our bricks are the relationships that we're building with people, and if we don't have those, we don't have a pop-up museum, we don't have a museum. And so I think our personalities and like the way we grew up and the experiences that we had. Derek went to RIT for 1 year, so good for Derek. Transferred to Mass Art, I don't know why. So I think we're kind, we certainly had a lot of energy, we weren't afraid to ask people for help, and we had design. I mean, I really think our design education, we felt like we could do anything. And it was like fake it till you make it. That's what design is, right? That fruit bowl, that didn't work. I mean, it was a model, it was a mock-up. And so we didn't feel like anything could stop us. And I think that came from our industrial design career, for sure, education. More questions? Yeah. Why Portland? Yes. So I had this crazy idea. We got accepted into like the largest entrepreneurial accelerator in the world. It happens in Boston. It's called Mass Challenge. We're the only nonprofit. Don't ask me how we got in. That's a whole other story. I faked the application the year prior to learn about the process, right? Made a fake company, learned everything about it, and then I applied for real the next year. So that's the short story. So we're at Mass Challenge. We got all these like mentors and money helping us. And I had one fateful meeting with one of our mentors. All of our mentors and board members were supposed to arrive. Derek was supposed to be there. Everyone canceled except for me and this guy, Ed. And Ed was like, what do you want to do? I was like, well, look, I got you here. Let's chat. And he goes, why just Boston? And I was just like, oh my God, because I'm here. Like, I happen to be here right now. And he was like, well, design is everywhere, right? That's your tagline. And I was like, okay. And he just got up and he couldn't draw for the life of him. He tried to draw a map of the US. And I like erased it. And I drew my own map. And he was like, where else is design happening? And I was like, putting all the major cities, San Francisco, New York, LA. Portland wasn't on the list. But like the practical, you talk about my business degree, I was like, this is gonna be a huge investment. So I was like, what about Providence, Rhode Island? Crazy idea, let's expand there and try it out. And, but still, I have a board of directors, so I had to run everything by them. They're my boss, collectively. And so I put together a proposal. At the time, I had 2 board members from Portland. They were 2 real estate developers who had basically built Portland. Like when they gave me a tour of Portland, they were like, we built this, we built this, we built this. Okay. I was like, what didn't you build? They were starting to build buildings in Boston. So they learned about us. By the way, one of them is the mother of our current board chair. So like, we're keeping it in the family. So they wanted to get involved. They loved what we were doing. And they were on that board when I presented the Providence plan. And they voted yes, and the 2 board members resigned. But they were like, don't do Providence, do Portland. And I was like, okay, I'll bite. Like, give me some, what are you talking about? They were like, well, they played off my ambition for sure. They were like, do you want to be a regional organization or do you want to be national? Obviously, you want to be national. And they wrote a big check, huge check. So that helps too. And not only they write the check, but they also flew me to Portland over and over and over. And I met, so a lot of people are like, because we started the museum pretty quickly, even though it was a hard few years. But we had this network of people, we knew everyone. I mean, running the IDSA chapter, I knew every industrial designer in Greater Boston. I had their names, I had their emails. And then we were collaborating with AIGA and American Institute of Architects. Like, for 2 23-year-old designers in Boston, we knew tons of people. I mean, Derek grew up in the Boston area, so he had family and connections. That's all the currency of nonprofits. In Portland, I didn't know anybody. But on these trips, they introduced me. I don't know if, like, Wieden & Kennedy, it's like the biggest ad firm on the West Coast. They do all Nike's advertising. Nike, they introduced me to them. They introduced me to all the different design schools. They knew how nonprofits work. And they made it so. And so not only did they write the check, but other people wrote checks. And all of a sudden, we got a real budget. And I got the board to approve Portland. And I started flying to Portland at least once a month, if not twice a month, for like 3 years. Portland's a whole, we can go and like expanding to Portland and SF makes starting the museum seem super easy. Expansion is like a whole different, because you have, like, I'm in Boston. I embody the culture and I can just tell my team exactly what to do at all times. But in Portland and San Francisco, I'm not there. And so it's been I've learned a lot about operations and culture, and yeah, it's been awesome and interesting. But yeah, good question. All right, what's that? Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, they are, I would say, one of our biggest donors, which is a wonderful thing. Everyone thinks it's me. They always see, like, because my dad's name is Sam, and they're like, oh, look at you. And I'm like, no, $500 at the beginning. No, they love the museum. They hate that I still tell the story about like how they were like, design, you're not going to do design. But hey, that's what it is. Yeah, they love everything about it. They're amazed. And it's funny, when I send you the book, like in the foreword about this playscapes, like the childhood that they gave my siblings and I, of like running around, playing, building, like we were so free that I can draw that like straight line from like how they raised us in like rural Pennsylvania to coming to RIT and to being an industrial designer. Like they get it now. They see the full picture. But yeah. I also once, Bruce Nussbaum, he wrote for Business Week, and he was like the guy putting it in. Design was in the mainstream kind of. I saw him in an elevator once at an IDSA conference. And it was like me and him. And I was just like, Bruce, I just want to thank you. And he was like so weirded out. But I was like, it was him writing about design in Business Week that my dad was like, oh, design, okay, my son does that. I think I'm getting it. So yeah, I got to thank Bruce Nussbaum. He probably like was like, this guy's gonna kill me. But yeah, so they're behind it now. Just, it's a good feeling. Oh yeah, great question.
Have you ever thought about like asking people or like followers or whatever, like they tell you what to do?
Yeah. It's funny you asked that because remember that like social network I showed? That was one of our first ideas, was to just have the community kind of curate what we would do. And I think we were just too small, and that was like too big of an ask, but I think we're almost at a point where we could do that. What we do is, before I showed you a lot, I showed you a few of our projects. We've done so many, some more impactful than others. And about 2 or 3 years ago, we decided we really need to focus on the impact of design. Like if we can do anything, we're doing exhibits about the design of restaurants and the design of airports and travel. Like you could do an exhibit on the design of microphones. So we were like, all over the place. And not that 12 things is like a focus by any means, but is a framework to sort of say, because I'll tell you, people do come to us and they say like, so I was one of my friends in Portland, he's a veteran, and a lot of his former, colleagues or fellow soldiers, I don't know what the right word is, lost limbs in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he was like, one day he was like, have you ever thought about doing an exhibit on prosthetics? Because there's just so much cool stuff happening. And I was like, prosthetics? Because that's a really nice thing about not having a building. I don't know if how traditional museums work. Like they have to curate and fill these galleries, and they've got curators lining up. For like the MFA in Boston, they got galleries planned out for 20 years of like the printmaking curator has a slot, in 2020 and 2050. And we don't have that problem, right? We can kind of go where I can hear about prosthetics, I can hear about play. The Playscapes exhibition, I read an article in the Atlantic. It was called I also mentioned in the book, it's called The Overprotected Kid. And it was all about how kids aren't allowed to like leave a tiny radius around their parents. And I was like, that was not how I grew up. And then they had all psychologists, psychiatrists, whatever, saying the problems with that. Like you had the dean of Stanford saying that like freshmen are coming in and they can't even take care of themselves because they've never been away from their parents. And I was like, oh my God, we got a problem. Now, what can we really do as a design museum? We're not going to change that, but what was the core for me? It was play. And so we did an exhibit around play. But I always have to, that's kind of like the philosophical. We write like program proposals, we run them through the board, we run them across ourselves. Of course, a huge part of it is what can we get funded. But that's been also really interesting. In the past, we've had corporate sponsors around each, like one of these, but now we just have donors who are like, just do what you guys want to do. And so it's a really cool time. That's why prosthetics, like we don't really have a big sponsor, but we have a bunch of donors who are like, yeah, that's a cool, like interesting topic to dive into, and no one's done it yet. So, but yeah, it's always, I have the same, like when I was at Bose as a designer, I was worried I was gonna run out of ideas and then they'd stop paying me. And we've built these processes in place where people can submit ideas, and we have a board, and we have my team. Our next exhibit that I didn't mention is all about diversity, and it's called We Design, and it's about showing women and people of color who work in the design world. And that was a group of my staff were like, I think actually it was after the election in 2016, they were like, yeah, we're doing something. And they came up with this concept called We Design, and that's gonna be our future. I haven't funded it yet, but they're working on it. It's cool.
I think this is a good spot to invite you all to continue this conversation upstairs in the ID studio. There's an extraordinary amount of pizza waiting for you. Please come and eat it and continue the conversation with Sam. Sam, thank you so much.
Thanks everyone. Yeah, thanks a lot. That's cool. Is that good? Cool. Have fun.
I have a feeling there'll be more to talk about upstairs.
Perfect.
See if we can squeeze some pizza.
That sounds good.